Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. Mom? Yes, honey, Kendra replied to her daughter. The two of them were driving home from Patrick's apartment. Jessie just spent the weekend with her dad. Usually, when it was time to leave her father, she was already quite gloomy, but today it was different. Something else was clouding her mood, besides the fact that she missed the time when her father was in the next room. Kendra couldn't identify what it was, but her maternal intuition was sounding the alarm. She had already asked Jessie twice if she was okay. I received a formal response. I'm fine, but they both knew it wasn't 100% true. However, Kendra was learning to respect her daughter's boundaries and not push too hard, so she didn't force things. Their relationship had been in a fragile state for a long time, and she tried to be more open with Jessie. She hoped that over time Jessie would feel comfortable enough to reciprocate, as he had with her father. Patrick always made it so easy. He was always a good listener and reacted well to unexpected news. Kendra would like to be like him. She hated the saying women are emotional, but that was usually her first reaction. It was obvious that he was a beloved parent. Jessie was Daddy's daughter to the core. Kendra was jealous of their relationship, which only increased her anxiety. Being not the most beloved parent is one of those pitfalls that have to be overcome when spouses live separately. Jessie paused for a moment before asking, "What happened to Mr. Sean?" This caused Kendra to react suddenly, briefly taking her eyes off the road. Jessie quickly looked away from her mother in surprise. She wanted the question to sound casual and detached. Kendra's reaction showed that she had failed. Kendra's affair with Sean, which lasted 2.5 years, ended almost 6 months ago. It was right before Father's Day. He didn't take it very well, but he respected her decision, albeit a little reluctantly. She couldn't blame him for that. In fact, she had wasted 2 years of his life by forcing him to chase after a woman he couldn't hope to catch. Jessie had never really loved Sean, and who could have expected that from her? Even with her young 10-year-old mind, she understood that his intrusion into her mother's life was directly related to her father's departure. She heard the arguments. She caught the barbed comments they threw at each other, often believing that she would not understand them because of her age. But most of all, she heard deep sobs of pain in the middle of the night. Her mom was crying in the bathroom while taking a shower. Her father cried as he slept on the couch, covering his sobs with a pillow. No matter how hard her parents tried to shield her from sadness and anger, they couldn't hide the pain that lurked in them. Even when they were telling her, "I love you," she felt that something was missing. Something that once was, but is now gone. And to be honest, it not only saddened her, but also angered her. She was angry at Sean for destroying her family. She was angry at her mother for being with him. And she was angry at her father for letting this happen in the first place. The truth was that Sean was a symptom of the deeper malady of Kendra and Patrick's marriage. He was a cough on the background of cancer, which was killing them from the inside out. But for Jessie, it was so simple. Her father was leaving, Sean was coming, and despite her young age, she sensed the untruth in the statement that Sean was just her mother's friend. Therefore, Jessie's casual question about the fate of a man for whom she had no warm feelings, at best, interested Kendra. She asked curiously, "Why did you ask about him, honey?" Still avoiding her gaze, Jessie shrugged and replied, "I don't know. Just curious, I guess. I haven't seen him for a long time." Kendra had to turn back to the road for a moment to make sure they didn't end up in a ditch, but she said, "Well, you could say that he and I decided that it was better for us not to be friends anymore." Jessie let out an exasperated sigh at the word friends. Part of her wanted to scream at that, but she hadn't been raised to openly disrespect her mother. Instead, she just accepted it and asked, "So he won't be here anymore?" "Well, that's it. Keep you company?" "Keep me company?" Kendra asked with a grin that was both nervous and surprised, realizing that Jessie might know more than she was telling. "Yes, well, hanging out and all that. To practice art, as you usually do." Kendra was slightly stunned. Jessie definitely knew something. One of Kendra and Sean's common interests was art. It was one of the things she could do with him, but she couldn't do with Patrick. Adults often forget that children perceive much more than we think. They are like silent observers, watching our actions so that one day they can begin to imitate us. The thought scared Kendra, very strongly. Lately, she has been searching for herself. The conversations with the therapist through Zoom were very informative. Mostly, she discussed her affair with Sean and the conflicting feelings he aroused in her. On the one hand, she considered it the worst decision of her life. It was worth too much. Not only her marriage and family, but also who she wanted to be as a person. She was no longer proud of the woman she had become. On the other hand, she felt something for Sean. Love? Maybe, but not like Patrick's. She had some kind of family connection with Sean. His youthful cheerfulness gave her what she needed at that moment. Yes, it was wrong, but it was right. If she had met him in another life, things might have turned out very differently. Her affair with Sean wasn't the only thing she and her therapist explored together. Sean was just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much more inside her that she didn't even know about. How she got to the point where she felt the need to cheat on her husband was a long journey mired in interdependence. "No, we won't be spending any more time together," Kendra replied. For some reason, she felt the need to add, "I think it's for the best. Do you understand?" Jessie nodded with a thin smile and looked out the passenger window. There was silence between them for a few moments. The only sound was the soft hum of the car engine. Then, very carefully, almost delicately, Jessie asked, "Do you think Dad will ever come back to live with us again?" If there were ever words that could bring Kendra to her knees, it was them. It was a question she had been asking herself for months. She asked herself this question whenever she had a free moment. Will they be able to get through this and find a way to each other? She didn't have an answer for Jessie or for herself. Instead, she answered her question with her own. "What's wrong, honey? Why are you suddenly asking about Sean?" Jessie visibly tensed up from her mother's simple interrogation. Then suddenly tears began to flow down her cheeks. "Jess?" Her name, uttered in her mother's worried voice, only broke the dam. The tears turned into a torrent, and then her body suddenly shook with sobs. "Oh my God, baby, what happened?" It got so bad that Kendra had to pull over to the side of the road. Her daughter needed attention, and she couldn't do it, trying to navigate the traffic situation. So she stopped at the nearest parking lot, which turned out to be some kind of medical center. After parking the car, she unbuckled her seatbelt, turned in her seat, and hugged her crying daughter. Jessie pressed her cheek against her mother's comforting chest and continued to sob. Kendra waited patiently, lovingly rocking her daughter back and forth. A wave of guilt washed over her. Obviously, this had something to do with the ruined state of her family. Jessie was so young, but her emotions had gone through more than any child should have. The loss of her uncle, whom she had counted on very much, the breakdown of her parents' marriage, and then a nuclear explosion caused by, her mother's relationship with a young man. So many things have happened. Kendra would like to go back. I dreamed every day. But all she could do at the moment was deal with the consequences. Kissing the top of her head, Kendra said in a soft and soothing voice, "You can tell me everything, honey. Whatever you need to say, you can tell me." "No, I can't," Jessie said brokenly between sobs. "No, you can. I promise. I'm here to listen." Jessie hiccuped, and then her breathing faltered. Finally, she looked up at her mother with sad eyes. "Promise not to get mad?" "Yes, baby, I promise." Kendra did not know that this promise was one of the most difficult she had ever had to fulfill. Sometimes blissful ignorance is better than absolute knowledge. "Hello?" "Hi, Ken," Patrick greeted casually. "What happened?" Kendra sighed sadly. This caught Patrick's attention. With concern in his voice, he asked, "What happened? Is something wrong with Jessie? What a difficult question." It had been about 2 hours after the car ride, and Kendra still couldn't get over it. Now Jessie is locked in her room, and Kendra is left sitting on her bed with her head spinning. "Yes, Patty," she said, her irritation mounting. There's a lot wrong with Jessie. Kendra expected Patrick to ask her a barrage of worried questions, but he didn't. He calmly accepted this statement, as if he already knew everything. That in itself was very revealing. "She told you, didn't she?" Finally, he asked. It wasn't so much a question as a statement. "I knew this was going to happen." Kendra made a sardonic sound. "What did she tell me, Patty?" What could she tell me? Patrick didn't answer right away, so Kendra added, "Maybe you have something you need to tell me." On the other end of the phone, Patrick shook his head sadly. His thoughts went back to the previous evening. He had just finished cooking dinner for himself and Jessie. She loved spaghetti, and he thought it would be nice to cook them for her. As soon as he finished setting the table, he called her to him. There was no response. Assuming she hadn't heard him, he called out again. Still silence. Slightly annoyed, he took off his apron and went in search of her. He found her in his bedroom, sitting on the bed. It looks like she was reading something, one piece of paper. At first he didn't think much of it, thinking it was homework or something. But then she looked at him with a haunted expression on her face. There were tears in her eyes. And then the paper in her hands became frighteningly familiar. It was an old, crumpled, battered sheet from a lined notebook, which was repeatedly unfolded and folded. He couldn't see what was written on it, but he didn't need to. He knew what was there, almost verbatim. It was he who wrote the words that his daughter read almost a year ago, on New Year's Eve 2020. Just a few hours before the year 2021, he was sitting in this very bedroom, drunkenly cursing with tears in his eyes. Jesse was reading his suicide note. Patrick's first reaction was anger. He quickly crossed the space between them and snatched the paper from her hands, after which he shouted, "What did I tell you about digging through my stuff?" The anger evaporated when he looked into her frightened eyes. Her lips were trembling with emotions he had never seen before. "You... really? Did you try to commit suicide?" Jesse looked at him expectantly, hoping that he would say something that would relieve her of this sickening feeling, an explanation, an excuse. Hell, she would have accepted even his cry of, "Happy April Fool's Day." But he had nothing. The only thing he could say was, "It was a long time ago. Dad, it was only last year." "I know, but what?" He didn't know what to say. What could he say? What could be said? He hadn't planned for her to find out about it. "Oh my God," Jessie said under her breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Her body trembled as full awareness came. It wasn't some terrible nightmare. It was reality. Right now, her father could really be dead, has left, and she would never see him again. Everything that had happened since that night flashed through my mind. She graduated from the 6th grade. She played the flute at the reporting concert. Of course, certain restrictions were imposed by COVID. There were no spectators except for the parents of the performing students and a small film crew of 2 people. However, the concert was virtually streamed live on Facebook so that everyone else could see it. However, Jessie wasn't performing for the cameras. She played from the bottom of her heart for 2 people who were proudly watching her from the seats. To her delight, they sat side by side as if her family had become one again. There were other memories of 2021. On Father's Day, her father invited her to a daddy-daughter date. Just a few days ago, they had a nice Christmas dinner together, the 3 of them. It was special because last year, the disclosure of Kendra's infidelity was fresh. Emotions were running high. They couldn't even be in the same room together without getting personal. But this year, Kendra invited Patrick to Christmas dinner. Patrick kindly agreed. The 3 of them were sitting at the table, laughing and talking as before. The year 2021 was filled with similar moments. And now, with only a few days left until the end of the year, Jessie has learned that none of this would have happened if her father had carried out his plans. And why did I keep this stupid letter? Patrick condemned himself. The evidence was a fool. However, he knew why he kept it. It was a reminder. After his brother's death, he lived like a zombie. Dead, barely alive, wandering aimlessly through my days. But that night was a wake-up call. Right on the threshold of leaving this world, life became clearer than ever. He found a reason to stay, to keep fighting. He stayed for Jessie. She was the one who saved his life. Unfortunately, Patrick couldn't explain all this to her. Now her world has been destroyed. All he could do was hug his little girl, her face pressed against his stomach, and her arms wrapped around his waist. "I'm so sorry, Jessie," he said, squeezing her with all the love he could muster. "I wouldn't want you to see that." "But why? What is it?" she asked, her voice a little muffled due to the fact that she was pressed against his stomach. "Why would you do this?" "I didn't do it. I'm still here." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "But you almost did it." But he didn't. That didn't calm her down much. The fear of losing him gripped her. The fact that he left home was quite traumatic. That was it, something else. "Please, Dad, don't do this. Don't leave me anymore. Never. I need you." "I promise, honey," Patrick said, nodding, and a single tear rolled out of his eyes. "I give you my word that I will never do this to you." They hugged each other like that for what seemed like an eternity. Then we went and had dinner in silence. When Kendra picked her up a few hours later, she and her daughter exchanged sad smiles. Patrick hoped her fears were allayed. He hoped his promise was enough to allay her worries. But there's still something in her eyes. To be honest, he was half expecting this call. Despite all that Kendra had done as a wife, she was a good mother. She would have noticed that something was wrong with their daughter. But alas, here he is, and here she is. "Listen, Ken," he said in a flat tone that he hoped would diffuse the situation. He saw her anger flare up, and he didn't want to get into an argument. It's not worth inflating the situation unnecessarily. Jessie found something she shouldn't have seen. I explained to her that it was just a mistake. His indifferent attitude did not reassure her. In fact, the opposite is true. Kendra smiled incredulously. "A mistake?" she said with malicious sarcasm oozing out of her voice. "A mistake, just a little omission. In judgments?" Kendra, ignoring him, continuing to rant cynically, she said, "It's like forgetting dinner on fire or, I don't know, lose the car keys. It's nothing serious. If you just listened." "What did you listen to? Are you trying to justify suicide?" "Fuck you." Patrick sighed in disappointment. Knowing his ex-wife, he understood when she was no longer able to reason sensibly. At this point, the conversation turns into a series of sarcastic jabs and condescending remarks. He could give in and sink to her level. He could have reminded her that part of the reason he was in this was because she betrayed him in the most terrible way. He could have told her that while she was out with her boyfriend, he was left alone with the lowest point in his life. He could have said it all, poured it out of his chest, and poured her shit right on top of her. It would be so nice. Just a second. But that momentary satisfaction would have kept them arguing all evening. And to be honest, he was tired of arguing. Taking a deep breath to collect his thoughts, he simply said, "Are you done, or do you have more in stock?" "Don't be smart," she snapped back. "And I'm not going to. I'm just wondering if you want to talk or just yell at me. If you want to scream, then of course go on. We won't solve anything and nothing productive will happen. But if you really want to talk, you'll have to listen, no less than you'll have to talk yourself." There was a slight pause, and he could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, so he added, "The choice is yours, Kendra." She exhaled before finally giving in. "Great, you have the floor. Thank you," he said sincerely. Then, still using his rational voice, he said, "I understand. You're upset." "Upset?" she gasped, blushing at his understatement. His groan made her remember that it was his turn to speak. Sighing, she said, "I'm sorry, go on." As best he could, he explained the essence of that night. He told me how lonely he felt, how hopeless and desperate his world looked. He didn't want to suffer another year like the one that had just passed. He lost his brother. I lost my wife, I lost my daughter, and he lost his mind. But despite all this, he reminded her of the most important fact. He's still here. He wanted to keep calm as he recalled that night, but he lost this battle. The unbridled emotions he felt while holding the blade at his wrist came flooding back. His voice cracked and cracked throughout the ordeal. For Kendra, every word he said was like a knife in her heart. Her anger was gone, and she could hear it. As he was telling his story about that evening, a flood of conflicting memories came flooding back to her, forcing her to change her anger to guilt. That night, Patrick sat all alone in his room, drowning in a sea of depression and loneliness. Whereas she was having the best time of her life with Sean, he was invited to a party by a group of friends to watch the ball fall. For the first time since it all started, he was able to openly introduce her as his special lady. Kendra had been hanging on his arm like a loving girlfriend all evening. She was smiling, she was laughing, she charmed his friends, and at midnight she passionately celebrated the new year with her new boyfriend. Then, early in the morning, Kendra and Sean celebrated the year 2021 in the most erotic way. They made their way to the balcony under the pretext of a smoke break, but none of them smoked. They just realized that while the party was raging inside, they were outside, alone. Kendra was never a prude. She realized early on that she had an influence on men. In marriage, her love interest always surpassed her husband's, even before depression. She was the only one who introduced new and fun adventures in the bedroom. She always took the initiative, even when Patrick was the initiator. That was the style of their relationship. It was completely different with Sean. He preferred to dominate, and truth be told, Kendra liked it. She liked to obey his will. Ever since she first met him in a hotel room, she found that she had a lot more to explore than she even thought. She didn't know what she would like to be spanked or used with her hands helplessly tied behind her back. She hadn't even imagined the thrill she would feel when Sean was deeply immersed in her. and people would be dangerously close to discover them. And when Sean whispered obscene words to her, when he hammered her, it brought her closer to an explosive moment than any man before him had done, including her husband. And so, while a drunken Patrick was gathering the courage to commit suicide, Kendra leaned over the balcony, holding onto the railing and preparing for Sean's incessant energetic thrusts. Her back was arched, her knees bent, and she accepted everything he could give. Damn. Okay, baby. Use me, Kendra breathed, her whiny moans mingling with a throaty whisper. Sean slapped her ass. With his other hand, he grabbed her by the throat, pushing even harder. Their skin collided with soft slaps. Something came over him. He couldn't explain it. Here he was using the sweetest woman he'd ever had, and an image of her husband flashed through his mind. He was overcome with jealousy. Irrationally, yes. But that didn't stop him from feeling like he was living in Patrick's shadow right now. He asked cruelly, "Does he ever use you like that?" It almost threw Kendra off her stride. He felt her tense up and realized that he had gone too far. He quickly pulled himself together and did not escalate. The last thing he wanted was for her to tell him to stop. "Tell me you like my organ." A wave of relief filled Kendra. Sean sometimes did this, belittled Patrick. She didn't understand that. For whatever reason he was doing it, she didn't like it. So she was glad that his attention was distracted. "I love him, baby. You have the best one in the world," she said, giving him the boost to develop the ego she knew he was looking for. The two of them were making love outside under the stars, while a party was raging with a room full of people who could come out and catch them at any moment. From the deliciousness of this scenario, Kendra was on the verge of bringing the matter to an end. And then the unexpected happened. They both heard a voice. Female. He announced that she was going out for a smoke. They didn't have time to recover and maintain their modesty. Sean's trousers were around his ankles. Kendra's dress was pulled up on her back, pulled up over her chest, and her panties were twisted in her lap. Damn, they were caught. "Oh, mine. God," the voice gasped in surprise when she saw a depraved scene in front of her. Sean stopped pushing and Kendra turned to see one of the ladies she had been introduced to just a couple of hours earlier. Cheryl. Or Sharon. It doesn't matter. Her name didn't matter. What mattered was the fact that she was standing here looking at them in this undignified situation. Suddenly, Cheryl giggled and licked her lips, which then curled into a sly grin. In a seductive tone, she said, "Please continue. Don't stop because of me." Kendra tried to straighten up, but she was knocked back down. Surprised, she looked over her shoulder and met Sean's gaze. Nothing was said, but the look he was giving her was electric. Then he started moving again. His message was clear. He was going to use her right here, in front of this woman. Kendra looked back at Cheryl and found her looking back at her. She wasn't looking at them, but at her. She looked longingly at Kendra's face, watching her reaction to what Sean was doing. Cheryl's eyes slowly dropped down to Kendra's bouncing breasts, to her ass shaking with every thrust, and to her tense legs which bent to keep her upright. Then they stood up again to meet Kendra's gaze before she finally said, "My God, you're so damn hot." Kendra was flooded. Ugh, ugh, ugh. She moaned in unison with Sean's thrusts. Now he's really turned on. His movements became bolder as he no longer cared so much about not being caught. In a fit of lust, he grabbed Kendra's mane in his fist and yanked her head back. "Whoa!" Kendra screamed at the sudden movement. However, she and this woman did not lose touch through their intense eye contact. All this time, the woman was getting closer. One of her hands lifted her dress and got into her panties. At that moment, she was right above them, close enough to reach out with her free hand and grab one of Kendra's dangling boobs. Then she repeated what she had said earlier. She whispered, "You're a fucking goddess. Do you know that?" Then she gently took Kendra's chin in her hand, lifted it up, and bit into her lips with one of the strongest kisses of her life. The electric shock hit her directly. Kendra wasn't attracted to women, but kissing her at this moment while Sean was using her with all his might was the most erotic thing that had ever happened to her. Her insides exploded. All she could do was whimper into that woman's mouth. She never saw Cheryl again after that night, but the memories remained. She could still taste her lips. Now, almost a year later, the eroticism she always felt when she remembered that night had been replaced by guilt and fear. This could very well be the last night when Patrick was still alive. As great as it was in no way worth what it might have cost him and Jesse. What would she do if she came back from that party and found out that her daughter's father was dead? That was the only thing going through her mind right now. She could have lost him forever. She couldn't even imagine life without him. Even now, in their separation, he was there. When she started missing his voice, she would call. If she needed to see his face, she would come up with some kind of paper-thick emergency. He always came, even when he didn't want to. And lately, I've started accepting her dinner invitations like I did at Christmas. But like Jessie, she knew that she had almost lost those chances. He could have left and she would never have had a chance to fix it. But she couldn't even be angry about it because it was her fault. He felt that he had to end his life because of her. "I'm sorry, Patty," she said, bursting into tears. "I'm really, really sorry for everything I've done. It was the first time she saw it. I really saw it." Until that moment, she didn't understand what she had put her husband through. Of course, she knew what had happened was wrong, but she could always justify it. It was Patrick who was distancing himself from her. Patrick who was shutting himself off from her. Patrick who didn't care enough about their marriage to try to get help. Everything is on his conscience. Her affair is just the result of his inaction. But now she was forced to look past her own suffering and see Patrick. She saw him sitting there, ready to die, with no one by his side. How unloved must he have felt knowing that he had no one to call, knowing that the whole world was living without him, as if he had never existed. His own wife was experiencing the bliss of love that she had never experienced before, and he was sitting in a puddle of his own vomit. How could she be so selfish? How could she care so little about the man who supported her in the most difficult moments of her life? Even in the most difficult moments, he never made her feel like he was going to leave her. She knew that no matter what, he would still be there. Even in his depressed state, he was a better partner than she deserved. Now they both knew that if he had never left her, she would have left him at the most difficult moment. Kendra looked towards the bed where Patrick had once slept and imagined him lying there. Like a mirage, she saw him clearly. Here he is, reading some gibberish on his phone. He was never super intelligent enough to read novels or world news. No, Patrick was just scrolling through mindless entertainment like Reddit or TikTok. In her mind, Patrick looked at her with a playful grin, turned his phone to her and showed her some stupid video where a cat or dog does something stupid. She rolls her eyes, grabbing his phone, and the two of them laugh. These were her memories with Patrick. Simple ones. Cute. Stupid ones. Over a long period, such as a long marriage, these memories can become mundane, even boring. But there is something intimate about being so familiar with a person that these little moments add up to a single whole. When she thought about Sean, it was always something exciting and frankly loving. What they did together. Love is on the balcony when another woman is watching them. His fingers caress her under the table in the restaurant while they wait for their food. Or the time he pinned her against the window of their motel room and used her in full view of the whole world. Her butterflies fluttered as she just savored these memories. But here's the funny thing. Despite all the exciting memories she shared with Sean, her favorite memory was of Patrick. It happened 6 months ago, when he showed up on her doorstep to ask Jessie out on a father-daughter date. It was the happiest and saddest memory for her. After Patrick became the most depressing person in the world day after day, she finally saw him look like the man she fell in love with. And yet, it was sad because she couldn't share it with him. Sean was excitement, fun, and love. But Patrick is for everyone else. Everything she needed. That's the thing. Patrick could easily replace Sean. There was a time when they had a lot of fun together. Of course, he wasn't as adventurous as Sean, but she could teach him. She could persuade him to do wild and crazy things as she did. Patrick was already changing. She's noticed it lately. His social media was filled with things he had never been interested in before. Rock climbing, martial arts, hiking, canoeing. These are things she would love to explore with him. Why did they have to separate in order for him to come out of his shell? Despite all that Sean had brought to her life, there was always not enough something. As much as she loved being with him, she could never imagine their real future. And I couldn't figure out why. He was nice, gentle. He worshipped the ground on which she stood. But he wasn't. Patrick. She wished she'd realized that before things with Sean got out of hand. She would like to go back and fix what she did to her family. What if she had waited a little longer for Patrick? What if she had tried her best to help him overcome his depression? What if... Would they share Patrick's new adventures together? Or maybe it was the separation and the attempt on his life that pushed him to such changes. Maybe he needed to reach the bottom before he realized he needed help? None of them will ever know. The only thing Kendra knew was that she wouldn't survive losing Patrick. She needed him in her life. "Oh my God," she said with annoyance, her voice breaking from the tears that continuously flowed down her face. "Ken," Patrick said with concern in his voice, "are you okay?" Her sobs became too strong for her to speak. Her whole body was shaking. All she could say was, "I'm sorry, Patty. I have to go." Patrick was saying something, but she couldn't hear it. Her thumb had already clicked off. "What have I done?" she thought as a loud scream burst out of her mouth. It was so filled with pain that it reverberated throughout the house. As if exhausted, Kendra collapsed onto the bed and curled up into a ball. Then, she burst into tears. Jessie appeared in the doorway looking worried. Mom's wail of anguish reached her ears even through the headphones she was wearing. She knew it had something to do with what her father had almost done. She was also sitting in her room, unable to think of anything else. "Mommy?" The only response she got was Kendra crying. When she saw her mother in such a state, she reached out to the bed to join her. I lay down behind her and hugged her with my little arms. "Don't worry, Mommy," she said soothingly. "You'll always have me." These words made Kendra cry even harder. However, there was a consolation in this. "I love you, Jessie," she said in a trembling voice. "You are the best part of me and your father." Jessie smiled. Hearing it meant everything to her. "I love you too, Mommy.